Welcome everyone. We're going to get started just so we can get out of here on time. We're going to cover today the large Apidae. So Apidae is one of the 5 families of bees we have in the area, and we're just going to focus on some of the big ones today. If you took the course in January, we realized we covered way too much information because we did all of Apidae and all of Bombus ID. So this is kind of going to be a refresher if you took it because it's covering a lot of the same information, but hopefully in a more digestible manner. Okay, so the goals are to distinguish some of the larger non-kleptoparasitic bees, and then also just to practice generally identifying bees from photographs and using this handy dandy decision tree. Okay, so just some basic information. We've gone over this before, but just to use the terminology. So bees and all insects have 3 main body parts. They have the head, which is the head is pretty much the same as us, the thorax, which is the center section, and then the abdomen, which is the hind section. So I'll be using these words today: head, thorax, abdomen, and hopefully, keep them all straight. Oh, and just by the way, this is the tongue of this bee. This is Melitoma terrea, and they just have really long tongues. So that's what you're looking at right here. Okay, we're going to focus on the females today, partially just because it's a little bit simpler, just to, if we throw too many details at you, we kind of just, lose. It just gets too confusing. The females are also more commonly photographed because they are on the flowers more often because they are actively collecting pollen, whereas male bees are only collecting nectar because they're not collecting pollen. So pretty much all females have some form of pollen collecting hair, but like this is the same species here. You can see that the females are generally way hairier than the males. However, most of these characteristics will follow on for the males as well. But we're just going to generally focus on the females. Okay, the other thing, I guess the 2 main things you need to know for today that are helpful are the pollen carrying hairs, which are called scopa. So for bumblebees and honeybees, they're the only ones that have these things called pollen baskets, which shoves all the pollen into this little dense structure called a corbiculate or a pollen basket. And so if you see it looks like gum that's like stuck to the side of their leg, if you see that, then you know that it is a bumblebee or honeybee. If it has hair on its legs, it's not going to be a honeybee or bumblebee, but it's instead going to be another bee. And a lot of different bees across all bees, not just family Apidae, have pollen on their legs. So it's not going to be the most distinguishing feature, but it will help you especially separate out from bumblebees and honeybees. Okay, and with that, just general information, what the plan is for today is I'm going to walk through some species and just if you have that bee guide or you've seen it online, just going to essentially walk through those pages just so we know what we're talking about, and then we'll have an opportunity to practice using the key. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I will try to answer them. Okay. So, and also if you have the key, I'm going through them in the same order as the key, just to make it easy. Okay, so first we have bumblebee, bombus. This is hopefully a lot of you know what a bumblebee looks like. But we're going to go over some bees that look really similar to bumblebees today. So really knowing in your head what a bumblebee is will help you distinguish these other bees. So bumblebees are going to be some combination of, yellow and black. It really varies based on the species. But a lot of them have this pollen, if it's a female and it's collecting pollen, it's going to have a pollen basket on its hind leg. And if she doesn't have a pollen basket, generally, you can't really see here, but you can kind of look at the front leg here. The front leg is similar to the back leg. It's not very hairy, and it's actually a pretty wide leg. They have these kind of wide triangular sections of the legs. So distinguishing a bumblebee from some of these other similar looking species, the legs are going to be a really good indicator. Also, the the abdomen is hairy, which can be hard to tell at sometimes, but it's going to have hair on it. Oh, Cheyenne, I'm already recording it, so you're good. Okay, next we have Xylocopa virginica, or the Eastern carpenter bee. So first of all, this is going to be probably the biggest bee you see in your yard, with the exception of some bumblebee queens. These bees they have this kind of orange colored hair, which I find is a really good indicator of the species. And then they're going to have a black shiny abdomen. They also have hairy legs. So you can see, as compared to those bumblebee legs, which weren't very hairy, these legs are pretty hairy. You can see actually the leg is pretty skinny there, and then there's really long hairs on either side. So the hairy leg, the shiny abdomen, the large size, I know that's sometimes hard to tell in photographs. And I will say also the orangish colored hair is a pretty good indicator of this species. Okay, now this species. So this is Haberpoda laboriosa. I will say I'm gonna cover this, but we don't have any plans to ever start Shutterbee in like April, May, and that's when this bee is out. It's a primary pollinator of blueberries. But I just wanted to show it to you today, but I don't think we have a single observation in Shutterbee, simply because it's very much only a spring bee, and you know, we're not planning on starting Shutterbee earlier than we do. But you know, if you're out and taking photos in your yard earlier in the year just for fun, especially if you have a blueberry plant, you might see this bee. But just keep that in mind, that this bee is only out early in the spring. So Haberpoda, I will say, kind of just looks like a weird bumblebee. That's kind of how I think of it. Or it's like if a bumblebee and a Xylocopa carpenter bee had a baby, because it has this shiny abdomen and kind of orange colored thorax, but it has these hairy legs. The males, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about males, but sometimes you can see it have this very large yellow patch on their face. Also, this bee is pretty small. It's 10 millimeters. That's roughly the size of a honeybee. So you're looking for a much smaller bee than the carpenter bee. And I know a lot of you might, it's hard to find out the exact size of the bee, but a lot of you know your flowers really well. So just think of, relative size to the flower. This bee is pretty much the same size as the flower, whereas a carpenter bee is going to be much larger. But these can be tricky to tell between the carpenter bee and the Haberpoda. Okay. Yeah, and actually, if you look at the distinguishing feature is pretty much the size between the carpenter bee and the Haberpoda. So just kind of being able to look roughly at the pollen. I will also say the Haberpoda has hair on its face. You can see this little black hair right here, whereas the carpenter bee does not. I think I just got sorry. Okay, just making sure I have the chat up. And yeah, if there's anyone that has questions or wants clarifications, then please just feel free to pipe up or put it in the chat. Okay, next we have, I will say how to pronounce this first. It's a silent P, like in pterodactyl. This is Tylochtrix bombiformis. My constant reminder that all bee names are pretty much fake Latin. There's a million ways to say everything, so don't be ashamed if you don't quite know how to pronounce stuff. You can kind of just make it up as you go along, but the silent P will help you with this one, Tylochtrix. You also see people just call it PT bomb. This is the hibiscus bee. This bee is kind of hard to photograph. If you all have hibiscus in your yard, you'll often see the males just roving in and out of the flowers, so they're pretty hard to photograph, which makes it challenging. But they're just kind of like weird looking bees, which I think helps ID them. So the abdomen is kind of all black, but it has this kind of like brown colored, it almost looks like kind of satiny section of its abdomen. And then its thorax is kind of all this light brown. It has just these like kind of strange legs. Like, oops, I like don't have a good way to describe them. They just like kind of look a little weird. I know that's not the most eloquent way, and it's kind of hard to you know, say, oh, these are weird looking legs, but they kind of jut out at a really wide angle. The reason is because these bees are super cool in that they collect water to soften the dirt they nest in. So actually, like water striders, they're able to stand on the water. So if you kind of think of them having water strider legs and legs that like jut out really far and allow the bee to not break the surface tension of the water, maybe that will help you kind of figure them out. So yeah, they have these long legs that really jut out far away from the body. And they're overall like kind of skinny bees, especially compared to bumblebees, which are a little rounder, carpenter bees, and Hapapoda and Anthophora, which are all just kind of a little bit of a chunkier bees. These are svelte bees. And you'll often find them on hibiscus flowers, but not all the time. So that's another good indicator. Okay, I'm almost done with this part, and then we can get to the kind of more fun hand-on section. Okay, so this is Anthophora. I will say, just to start off, the species on the left is by far the most common one we have in the area. This is Anthophora abrupta. This is the other one we have, Anthophora ursina, but it's not very common. So really, you're looking at this thing that kind of looks like a bumblebee, which can make it challenging. So the big way to distinguish this from a bumblebee is that it has these long, hairy legs that compared to the bumblebees, whose legs are generally not very hairy and have this really large kind of triangular section where the pollen collects. So you're looking for, yeah, really hairy legs. It generally has really long hair overall. So this bee, if you know your bumblebees, looks pretty similar to Bombus impatiens, which is the common eastern bumblebee. But Bombus impatiens has pretty short hair overall, whereas you can see that the hair on this thorax is super long, and on its abdomen is long, and it's on its legs is really long. So if you're just looking for a super long, like just looks like a bumblebee kind of, but just has super long hair overall. Also, it has this extra toe between the claws, but this is really hard to see. So we have it as a distinguishing key, but I don't really think it's that useful unless we have really, really high quality photos. But I'm going to talk a little bit about in a second about how you can avoid having to figure out if it has an extra toe. So I wouldn't worry much about that. But yeah, generally Anthophora, they're mostly common in the spring. It's kind of, I've noticed you either don't have any Anthophora in your yard or you have a ton. You'll often see them like visiting a water source, but I think they are kind of somewhat communal nesters. So you either don't have any or you have a lot, which I guess makes it helpful. Okay, so this is Anthophora.
So are they white as opposed to like yellow for a bumblebee?
The white? Sorry, what do you?
They look white while
Oh, the hair
are
here?
yellow. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a light yellow. So yeah, I would say it's a little bit less yellow than like a bumblebee, but it's definitely not white. It has like a brownish yellowish tinge to it. Yeah, I guess I would say it's more light brown than yellow. So I guess that's a good indicator as well. Yeah, there's a few things I'd probably make another iteration of these that, you know, I'm always learning, just like hopefully you all are always learning. I'm always learning more about the bees and finding better ways to ID them. So that's probably a good indicator. It's a lighter color hair, that's for sure. Okay. And lastly, one of the last ones I'm going to cover is Apis mellifera, European honeybee. This is actually the same shade as the bombus leg, so it's a pretty good indicator. This is what I was talking about this triangular section that they have on their legs. So generally wide legs with not many hairs because they have this triangular section. The big thing that gets people with honeybees is that their color actually varies a lot. So people tend to think of bumblebees as the one on the left, just like that orangey color with the stripes, but you get them all the way to like a very light, like orangey color without very many stripes, all the way to pretty much a completely black abdomen. So I think that's the thing that really gets people, is that the color varies. But bumblebees have a kind of a pretty distinct shape, like a very, I guess, like straight body. It doesn't really like flare out or anything. You'll also see them a lot flying with their legs out. So if you catch a bee flying, that's a good way to identify them in flight. They also just have a pretty hairy face overall. They have hairs on their eyes, which can be helpful, and their eyes are really dark colored, whereas a lot of other bees have like lighter, greener colored eyes. But yeah, honeybees can be deceiving just because sometimes they don't look like how you expect them to. So yeah, I would just say with them, really don't let color fool you. Really look at like the shape of the body. Is it kind of this kind of hairless abdomen that's kind of straight on the sides? And what do the legs look like are probably the biggest indicators. Okay, I'm going to cover these briefly, these next two, but then I will talk about them a little bit and you'll see why. Okay, so this is tribe Musurini, which is a tribe that's, I think, 6 or 8 genera that we have. The most common one in St. Louis is Melissodes. I'm sure you've seen a lot of your bees ID to Melissodes or the subgenus Melissodes. But this is also where Pepinopus prunosa, which is the squash bee, Sphaster obliqua, which is like a sunflower specialist, and some other bees fall. They're really diverse. There's lots of them, but fortunately they're pretty easy to ID. And that is because these are my favorite bees also. So I just really like them. The females have these incredibly hairy bottle brush legs that can get like absolutely covered and packed with pollen. Overall, they're kind of like chunky bees. They aren't super skinny. They're a little bit wide. But yeah, the females have these really, really hairy legs. And the males have really long antennae. So their antennae are like, almost or longer than their body. They're just hairy bees overall. You'll often see a lot of like multiple males hanging out on one flower. The bees are pretty common overall. Different species vary in how common they are, but you'll find these a lot in your garden, especially this one, Melissodes bimaculatus. This bee is pretty much all black. It's going to have kind of yellowy, white colored hairy legs. And it has these two, it's called bimaculatus, 2-spotted, because it has these 2 white spots, one on either side at the end of its abdomen that are white. So this is a pretty common species overall. But these are pretty easy to ID just because of the really hairy legs. And they're much bigger bees than other bees with hairy legs. So they're just kind of large, hairy bees. And then the males have these really long antennae. Okay, this is the last bee I'm going to cover. And this is Melitoma terrea. This is called the morning glory turret bee because they're supposed to be a specialist on morning glory. But I see them on like in Impamia, which I guess is in the morning glory family. I find them on hibiscus. I see them in a lot of non-morning glory flowers, so I don't think it's the most apt name. But these bees are really cool. They have this curved pattern on their thorax. In their hair, you can see it kind of looks like I don't know, like an omega or something for coming from this angle, if you know your Greek letters. So it's this kind of like stripy pattern of the 2 colors of brown hair on its thorax. And then these really prominent black stripes on the abdomen. There's a question, are they still around? No, I'm pretty sure these are pretty much only in the summer. You might find them in a little bit later. They're not the most common bees in the scheme of things. I find them around occasionally. You might see one. I don't know if they're still out. Pretty much most of the bees are done at this point. You still have some of the flowers blooming, but I'm not really seeing many bees out anymore. But yeah, I will explain where these are in the key in a second. So yeah, I just wanted to mention these two, just because they kind of go with the large Apidae, but this key, you know, it is kind of based on family, but it can't always be based on, it's not just on family. So what's happening is that Eucerini keys out down here. And Melatomateria, we're finishing up these keys, is going to key out with these striped bees here because it does have those very prominent stripes on the abdomen. So I'm mentioning Eucerini and Melatoma, but for this little training, just to make it easier, and because we're kind of going to have a striped bee training later, we are now going to take Eucerini and Melatoma and shove them in the back of our brain and not think about them right now. I just wanted to point them out now, but we're just going to focus on these bees up here, and we will talk about the Melatoma and Eucerini when we do. We're going to actually group them with a lot of the Halictidae, which are the metallic green bees and the striped green bees. Trying to think if there's any other stripy ones. No, pretty much those. So ignore them for now, and we will get back to them later. I just wanted to mention them briefly. Okay, so that means we are going to focus on the top half of the key. I'm just highlighting this here today. So if you have the key in front of you, or maybe in like another screen, you can kind of just open it up and make the zoom a little bit smaller so you can see them side by side. So we're going to look at everything up of Apis mellifera, or European honeybee. So pretty much just that first split up here, plus honeybees, just because it kind of made sense to put them here. So we have Bombus, and I guess how this key works is you figure out where you're supposed to go, say Bombus, and then this takes you to page 5. And if you look in that Shutterbee guide, if you go to 5, this is where the bumblebees start, and then you could flip through them. You could also go from the Bombus species to the whole bumblebee key we have, because we have one. So that's how these would work in theory. But I think for now we can kind of you can ignore these page numbers over here. But how this works is you pretty much go split here and then see how it forks, and then follow the forks until you get to the end, and hopefully get a species. Okay, I'm going to mention one more thing about this key, and that is right here. So if you go and say, okay, it's a mostly black bee, it doesn't have a pollen basket, it has a hairy abdomen, then you get this thing with the extra toe, which I mentioned is really hard to distinguish, even on photos that are like very good, just because it's just very tricky to see. But we are in luck in that from here, from hairy abdomen, we go to 2 species, Tylotrix and Anthophora. And I don't think you really need this. I think you can just kind of figure that out. And just to demonstrate, here is a picture of the 2 of them. And I just kind of want to highlight how they look similar, but how they look different, instead of trying to look for the extra toe, which is like impossible to see. So this is Anthophora on the left, and then we have Tylotrix on the right. You can see they have very similar coloring. They have this like duskyish, yellowish, brownish color on their thorax, and then a black colored abdomen. But overall, you can see that they look really different. The hair on this is kind of all over, where it's kind of just shaggy on this one. This is overall like a kind of a fatter bee, whereas this one's pretty skinny. The Anthophora has really long hair, whereas the Tylotrix overall on its body has really short hair. It kind of almost looks satiny instead of hairy. So I would say, instead of trying to be like, oh, is there a toe? Is there not a toe? I think this is where just kind of knowing what the species looks like will help a little bit more. or just kind of being able to compare them side by side will help a little bit more as compared to, yeah, trying to determine if there's a toe or not. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, and now that I've done an overview of them, the goal, if you went to the Bombas course, is just to take some time and do some practice. So we highly recommend that you use the key for the practice, even if you know what it is, just practice keying it out. Because I'm obviously choosing for you pretty good photos for this talk. I'm not giving you, out of focus, blurry photos or anything. So try to kind of use the key so that you're familiar with it, so that if you ever get a photo that's kind of less good than the ones I'm choosing for you, then you'll be able to figure out what the bee is. So I guess that's my hint to you. We'll go through them. I'll try to kind of talk about the distinguishing features and how we get there. But I'll try to give you, a minute or two to figure out every photo. Yeah, and if you have questions, if you're confused, don't be ashamed. I'm sure someone else has the question too, and we'll all learn by, going through it together, taking an extra second to look at it. Okay. With that, I'm gonna get going. If anyone has questions, feel free to, say something. Okay, I'm going to, so you should see a poll being launched in a second. If I did it right. Okay, so you'll see I launched a poll. The species are in order as they are in the key. And I will say, just sorry, before I shut up for a second, is I just put the genus here, but we only have one species of Xylocopa, which is Xylocopa virginica. We only have one species of Haberpoda and Tylotrix and Apis, but just to make it a little less busy, I just kept to the genus. So yeah, take a second, look at this photo, and when you feel like you know what it is, just select it, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, give you all another 30 seconds or so. Okay. So most of you, yeah, take an extra second to answer if you haven't. As I get access to my keyboard back. Okay, got it. Okay, sorry. So most of you said Xylocopa, and you had it right. We got a few for Bombas, one for Tylotrix, and a few for Anthophora. So I will say the big indicator is the large size. This is on some Solidago species, so that can be hard, but you can see that this bee is like pretty big overall, which is a good indicator. You can also see it has the shiny thorax here, and then the hairy legs. And I think the hairy legs really point to it not being Bombas, because you'll see it that has the hairy legs instead of the pollen basket. And so that should immediately split you off from bumblebees in that big first key, because it doesn't, the first split, because it doesn't have a pollen basket. And then, yeah, this is a shiny abdomen overall. There's not really hair you would see kind of hair coming out of it a little bit if it was hairy. And yeah, it's a large bee, which is going to indicate that it is a carpenter bee. Carpenter bees also, well, in St. Louis, we have a morph that makes the wings not super light or dark, but overall carpenter bees have really dark wings, which can be helpful. Okay, I'm gonna do another one. Okay, oh, sorry, let me restart the poll. So what is this one? Y'all are very speedy on this one. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna ask because a lot of you got this really quickly. Do y'all just recognize this as a honeybee, or is there a certain feature that you're looking for? What you all, a bunch of you like ID'd it within like 20 seconds. So I'm just curious. Do y'all just have it in your mind now what it looks like? What's the big identifying feature for this one? If anyone wants to type in the chat or to speak it. Yeah, so I got a pattern recognition. The straight abdomen, yeah. So it's really just has that, it's not going to flare out at all, which I guess differs it from Tylotrix. Yeah. Also, yeah, the legs. So that's what I first seeing. So you got the wing in the way, which distorts it a little bit, but those legs are don't have any hair, but have these really thick structures on it, and that's where the pollen is going to sit. We had a few people say Tylotrix. So Tylotrix wouldn't have any stripes on its abdomen like this. And overall there would be like a large coloration difference between the thorax and the abdomen. So the thorax is similar coloring to this, but the abdomen is going to be pretty much all just a brown color, which, and I'd say is a big indicator. Okay, so yeah, this is a honeybee, Apis mellifera. We only have the one species here. Okay, what about this one? Okay, so far no one said, oh, someone, so the first indicator is looking at that first decision is whether or not it has a pollen basket. And you can see on this, if I can see the screen, the back leg here. So these are from the plant, not from the actual, this isn't attached to the bee. So there's no pollen basket. These have pretty hairy legs, which indicates that it's not going to be a bumblebee. Then we have to see if it's a hairy abdomen or not hairy abdomen. So it can be a little hard to tell on the photo on the left, but on the photo on the right, you can see little hairs coming off, you know, on the sides here. This is when it's nice to be on iNaturalist because you can click on all the photos and zoom in, or if it's, you know, your photo, you can zoom in before you load it. But yeah, you can see little hairs coming off this, which indicates that it isn't going to be Xylocopa or Hyperpoda, which leaves us with Tylotrix or Anthophora. And most people said it was either Tylotrix or Anthophora. So yeah, this can be tricky. The first indicator is that this is a hibiscus flower. It's a little hard to tell, but it's on a hibiscus plant, which gives you a nice indicator. Also, the Anthophora I showed you was kind of squat overall and really hairy, and the legs were uniformly just super hairy. And that's not what we're really seeing here. Instead, we're seeing a slightly longer body. It's not super hairy. And the legs aren't just like super hairy. So this one was Tylotrix. Also, if you look really carefully right here, you can see that it doesn't have an extra toe, but that's pretty hard to tell. So this one was Tylotrix, which a lot of you got right. If anyone who got Anthophora wants to kind of like hash out, feel like where they got it wrong, I'm happy to talk about it. But if you also want to stay quiet, that's okay too. But yeah, this is a time to kind of, work out any problems. Okay, I'm gonna move on. And so what is this one? Oh, this one's tricky. Sorry, y'all. Or it could be. I will give a hint in that St. John, this is on St. John's wort, and St. John's wort pollen is orange, is my hint to you. Okay, right now everyone's saying Anthophora or Bombus. So we've determined it doesn't have a shiny hairless abdomen, it seems like. Okay, so it is tricky to tell, but this little orange nugget right here is a pollen basket. So it's hard to tell, but that is the pollen being packed on the leg, which indicates that it is a bumblebee. But if you could not see that, which I could understand it, you not being able to see, of all the bees we've discussed that are not bumblebees, the only coloration they have on their abdomen is very close to their thorax. So it's going to be really high and close to their thorax. For example, Tylotrix has some light brown on, it's called T1, and then the rest is black. It's the section closest to the thorax. Some of the other bees have that as well. Whereas this one has a lot of yellow on its abdomen because this is Bombus bimaculatus. It has coloration yellow on this first stripe and then the second stripe right there. So anytime you're seeing significant yellow on the abdomen, that's your indication that it's Bombus, where it goes farther down than the first section away from the abdomen or the thorax, excuse me. For those of you who missed, so if you went to the Bombus ID course, this would be T1 and T2. If you missed the Bombus ID course, there is a recording we can send you. You might have gotten in your email. It's also, I think it's unlisted, but we have a recording of it on YouTube that you can go through if you want. So this one is Bombus. Yeah, you can tell by that pollen basket, and then otherwise, I guess the coloration, but I guess you have to have a little bit of outside knowledge for that. Okay. Let's try this. Sorry, this one's also a little tricky. Let's try this one. we're getting a lot of Hepapoda, a few Xylocopa, and Amphora. Okay, first indication, we're not seeing any pollen basket. This pollen is all over those legs, so there's no pollen basket. So that's a good, no one said bombus, so that's good. We don't have a pollen basket. So that brings us to the next one. And whether or not there's a hairy abdomen or a shiny abdomen. It seems like pretty much everyone realized that there was a shiny abdomen. You can actually see this little dot of white is going to be, you know, the light reflecting off the hairless abdomen. Of course, there's some tiny, tiny little hairs on the edge, but it's generally a hairless abdomen, which is good because pretty much everyone said it was Xylocopa or Hepapoda. Okay, then it gets tricky for sure, especially because this isn't on a flower, so you can't figure out the size. But this one is Hepapoda. We should probably change. I actually am gonna write this down right now. I'd say I'm gonna change this key. I would say the biggest thing to tell this between Xylocopa is Xylocopa has a big spot in the center of its thorax, whereas this one doesn't have it. So that's kind of what I would use. You can also kind of see some hair on the head. But yeah, maybe I'm just thinking about it. We'll change that key. But because it has no spot on the back of its thorax, sorry, it's a little hard to tell. It's going to be Hepapoda. But overall, pretty much everyone got either Hepapoda or Xylocopa, which is great. Okay. So we're going to do a few more. Oh yeah, just a reminder, we're not keeping track of what anyone wrote in these polls. We're just using it as a way to make it interactive. Okay, it seems like so far people are recognizing it's not bombus. These are hairy legs. This is on milkweed, so there's not like true pollen, or it's pollen area, so that's what this weird stuff is. But there is no pollen basket, hairy legs, so therefore we should know it's not bombus. Now this is a hairless abdomen. There's not really any hair on it. It's pretty shiny. You can really see all the, kind of all the structuring here of how the abdomen is constructed, which indicates it's pretty much hairless. Now there is some hair, tiny bit up here, but overall that's pretty hairless because besides this tiny ridge of hair at the top, the rest of the thing doesn't really have much hair. So that puts us at Hepapoda versus Xylocopa again, but I just mentioned that the Xylocopa has that big spot in the center. And most of you got this, so this is Xylocopa. Yeah, once again, this thing is huge. This is on common milkweed. You can see it's like bigger than 4 flowers, which is another good indicator. Okay. Just giving you all the lookalikes today. Okay. Once again, no one's saying bombus, which is good. This is not a pollen basket. This is hair on the abdomen here, so it's a little hard to tell, but you'll kind of get the hang of seeing the hair versus the shininess. It can be challenging at times, but this is a very hairy bee. You can kind of see, I guess the way I'm seeing it is like it's darker here, and then you see the light reflecting off like the edge of the hair. Um, and then just like, if you kind of put your hair up to the light, the edges of the hair will kind of, assuming you don't have super dark hair, will kind of glow. So this is a hairy abdomen, which puts us into the Tylotrix or Anthophora. But this bee is overall pretty squat, it's like squat and wide, which puts it at Anthophora, which most people got. I can barely see the toe, so I would really, I think, not use that as a very good indicator. Okay. A few more. Oops, I think this one's male. I tried to get all females, but I think this one's male, so I apologize. So this one, as I said, is male, which means it has slightly less hairy legs. However, a few people said apis. Generally, apis have lighter wings, and I can see how this kind of, and these have much longer legs. And you can also see that this is in a hibiscus flower, if you kind of know the coloring. Also, the apis abdomen is kind of like, it's just like kind of like bullet shaped. It's really like cylindrical almost and really smooth. It doesn't really have much hair, whereas you can really see the hair on all of this. So this is not going to be a honeybee, but instead it's Tylotrix. It has a hairy abdomen. It has these really long legs. Sorry for getting a male once again. The females would have like a lot more hair on their legs. But yeah, I can see how these legs could be a little bit confusing. Then yeah, compared to honeybees, but yeah, they just have super long legs. So anytime you see these like really long legs, and yeah, once again, it's so they can like stand on the water. But I think if you're confused with honeybees, I would say, yeah, obviously this isn't on the key, but if you look at the difference between the photos of the honeybees, the honeybee wings are going to be very light colored, whereas these are pretty dark. We kind of can't put everything on the key because then it's useless, but like as you start to look at the bees, you'll be able to kind of see some of the more distinguishing features. Okay. We will do, let me see, I'm gonna skip this one actually. Okay, just to kind of wrap it up. So these are the same, these are obviously different bees, but these are the same species. I think this dovetails into what I was just saying to give it away a little bit. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is what I was saying earlier. Yeah, you all are getting this really quickly. So these are both honeybees, but they just have a really big variation in color, which I think gets people sometimes. But yeah, this is what I was talking about, like the bullet shaped abdomen. It's super skinny. There's no hair on it. Their eyes are also like really buggy. I mean, they're bugs. All of them are bugs, obviously, but they have pretty large eyes overall. But yeah, the abdomen is just this really kind of cylindrical, smooth looking shape, which just like nothing else really looks like it. But the actual color of the abdomen can vary a lot. So just be aware of that. But yeah, this is a honeybee. Okay, I think this is the last one. Just so we finish on time. This one is a little challenging, so I will give you all a little bit of time to figure it out. Okay. Yeah, this one was hard. Yeah, Dan took this picture, so if you're having a hard time, you can direct all anger towards him and not towards me for choosing it. Okay, I will say this one is challenging because this bee is old, and as bees get old, their wings get messed up, they start to lose their hair, it can get challenging to tell. So I put this photo in for 2 reasons. One, to remind you that if you're ever IDing things and you're unclear about what it is, that's totally okay. There's challenging photos out there and we are always here to help. I do a pretty good job of, going through all the photos on iNaturalist and things like that. But if you ever have a bee that you want like an explanation on, not just like an identification, but like feel free to tag me. Just tag me and say, hey, I was debating whether or not this is a carpenter bee or a bumblebee, and then I'm happy to take a little bit of time to kind of explain the thought process. So that's my just push to you. I'm spend way too much time on iNaturalist. If you have photos that have already been ID'd, from this year, from last year, from 5 years ago, and you just want a little explanation, like I'm happy to provide that. Just tag me on it and I'll write you. This one, I'm going to end this poll, is a bumblebee. So it can be a little tricky to tell. So first, kind of the giveaway to me is, like I said, these kind of triangular shaped legs or leg sections. This is where the corbiculate or the pollen load is going to stick. So that's kind of how I would say we should maybe indicate that it's not always the pollen basket, but just the shape of where the pollen basket would sit. It's a little bit hard to tell, but this abdomen is hairy back here. If it was shiny, I think you would be able to, you can kind of see that, like, obviously the light isn't going everywhere at once, but the face is almost a little bit shiny right here. And if the abdomen was shiny as well, if it wasn't having any hair, you would also probably see some sheen on it, but you're not really seeing any sheen on it, which indicates it has hair. So that kind of gets rid of the Xylocopa and Hyperpoda. As for Anthophora, this is where it gets tricky. I could totally see how you could see that this is Anthophora. it just kind of come down to like a little bit of semantics on like what the face looks like and things like that. So this was a photo just as a reminder that this is Bombus greasicollis. It's probably it's the second most common bumblebee you'll spot on your yard. Yeah, so the big spot on the abdomen is kind of due to hair loss. So this bee has had some time out in the world. You can see in this wing right here, there's an entire chunk taken out of the wing. The wing would be like straight across. So this bee has lost hair on its abdomen. It's missing chunks of its wings. This bee has seen better days. So I guess this is kind of just a reminder that there's hard ones out there. But you know, you'll start to get, if you practice or anything, you'll start to see photos like this and just start to recognize what it is. And that's kind of my hope for all of you.